Congressman, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Rick Crawford. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We so appreciate it.
Thank you.
And what can you tell us in terms of where we are here? You were obviously part of the Gang of Eight briefing yesterday without giving any secrets out. What can you tell us about next steps and where this is going, sir?
Well, so yesterday was a Gang of Eight briefing that was expanded to include some other members of key committees, to include Armed Services, Foreign Affairs, and Appropriations. And so there were some questions that they got to ask that were sort of in their jurisdiction as well. So it wasn't just a Gang of Eight. It was expanded. It ended up being about a gang of 16 to 20 or so, but it was a limited group of members, and the full House will be briefed today. What I want people to understand is that those individuals that briefed us yesterday, obviously Secretary Rubio, Secretary Hegseth, Director Ratcliffe, and Chairman Raising-Cane, did a fantastic job in laying out the conditions on the ground as they are right now, what has taken place to get to that point, and what their objectives are going forward. And so there's no mystery to me, and the rest of the House will find out today just where we are in greater detail. But I just find it curious that every time this president does something, it doesn't matter what it is, the Democrats come and object. I mean, they object to this action. It's just unconscionable that he would do such a thing. But almost all of them, if not all of them, voted for the exact same thing in 2011 when President Obama struck Libya. So, I mean, it's a selective application of moral outrage, and I find that just really unhelpful.
I mean, U.S. officials have confirmed that 6 American service members have given their lives following Iran's retaliation for this operation. Is it your sense that this does go on another 4 to 5 weeks?
Well, that's what I think they are saying, but look at what they expected, probably a 4 to 5 week engagement just to take out their leadership, and that happened in the first 48 hours. And so they're making really magnificent progress on every one of their objectives that they're trying to achieve with regard to hunting down the ballistic missile capability in the southern portion of the country, those short-range ballistic missiles, looking for their production facilities, looking for their munition stockpiles, all those kinds of things, degrading their Navy. Heck, I think most of their Navy, if not all of it, is at the bottom of the ocean. So they've made remarkable progress in a short span of time, and that's largely attributable to the leadership that we've seen over at the Pentagon.
And Mr. Chairman, I know that we've been talking about really I've been talking about two paths. You've got the War Powers resolution, but then you've also got a potential supplemental spending package. So I want to get your take on that, because I know that the Senate is set to vote on this War Powers resolution today, which would restrict President Trump's authority over military use without congressional approval. The House is going to vote on their version on Thursday. Before we talk about that and your sense of where this goes today, given the Democrats keep digging in on it, let me get your take on the weaponry that we are using and the stockpiles that we have, because I know many of our very, very important assets are now in the field, in the region. What are you thinking about in terms of replenishing that stockpile, in terms of ensuring that the United States has the wherewithal to produce the weapons that we need in a timely manner?
I think what we're seeing is a change in sort of culture, if you will, in the weaponry that we use, and recognizing that, you know, these really high-end precision missiles like a Tomahawk, for example, cost millions, whereas a one-way attack drone maybe costs tens of thousands. So you can see the value proposition that they bring to the table here by using those drones as opposed to Tomahawk missiles. Now, Tomahawk missiles may provide greater standoff depending on the type of strikes that you're talking about. But the fact is, you know, you can produce those drones much more quickly and much cheaper than you can really, you know, high-tech, long standoff missiles. And so you're seeing a change in the way that these types of operations are prosecuted with the types of weapons that they choose to employ. So we're going to see more of that. We're going to see more. In fact, Secretary Hegseth was just in my home state of Arkansas at one of the munitions plants there. We're starting to see more ramped up production of munitions here in the United States. That's important. And so we need to make sure that we're keeping pace, and that's what this Pentagon is trying to do. That's what this president is trying to do, is to make sure that we're prepared to defend ourselves all the time, anywhere. But you're just seeing a change in technology and the value of these drones that have been used against us, but now we're sort of turning the tables on them.
Well, I mean, given the congressional fiscal year 27 budget hearings set to begin in earnest, I mean, is there a conversation about a defense supplemental right now? We know that the president wants a $1.5 trillion defense budget for 27.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a topic of conversation. But as it applies to this particular operation, they haven't come up with a dollar figure, because what they have to do is say, OK, let's look at what we're expending over this 48-hour period and kind of try to extrapolate that over what their projected timeline is, which they really there's not a hard and fast rubric here that says it's going to be X. But you can look at what does it take to carry on an operation like this for a period of, let's say, 48 hours or a week or whatever, and probably extrapolate out on a weekly cost scale or a monthly cost scale or something like that to be able to provide some kind of number there. And that's what they're working out right now, because I do know that they are being very forthright with certainly with the Gang of Eight, and now later today the entire House. But the appropriators have that question, obviously, because they're the ones that are responsible for writing the checks. And so they're getting that information. It was a question that was brought up yesterday. They don't have the actual hard numbers yet, but they are going to make some projections and share that with our appropriators.
And I know that when talking about Iran or perhaps Venezuela, you can talk about these cheaper versions. But when you're talking about our number one adversary, and that is China, does that create the need for those Tomahawks and much bigger arsenals that we're talking about? I mean, China's foreign minister told the Iranian counterpart, his Iranian counterpart, Beijing, quote, supports Tehran in defending itself against the strikes. China reportedly urging the United States and Israel to immediately cease military operations, avoid further escalation, and prevent the conflict from spreading. Chinese companies are still trading on U.S. exchanges, and I asked Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent about this. In fact, I ask anybody who will listen about this, why are we funding our number one adversaries' plans for the military? Watch this. We've got Chinese stocks trading on U.S. exchanges. U.S. investors are buying those stocks, and that's helping China fund its military. Let's face it. Are you willing to go that far to remove Chinese stocks from U.S. exchanges?
Well, Maria, I think everything's on the table. We are putting in process export controls for high-value security-related goods. We are talking about the export capital controls in terms of, as you said, a blacklist of things that U.S. Whether pension funds, endowments, investors should not be investing in to fund the Chinese military machine. But that'll be President Trump's decision. President Trump, Chairman Xi have a very good personal relationship, and I am confident that this will be resolved at the highest level.
Mr. Chairman, what about that? I know that you're urging the Treasury to block U.S. capital from fueling the Chinese military. What can you do about it?
Well, we're going to keep pushing that message. And here, quite frankly, you've probably heard me say this before. Heck, I've probably said it on your show. I've got a real problem with U.S. funding the Chinese Communist Party through these pension funds, retirement funds, and so on. In many cases, American people don't even know that that's where their investment dollars are going. But that's, in fact, what's happening. And so what happens is everything that is in Communist China is owned by the Communist Chinese Party. So these sort of benign, innocuous companies that you're investing in, you think that that is, a good return on your investment. What you're really doing is funding the Chinese Communist Party and every aspiration they have against the United States, whether that be military, political, geopolitical, industrial, economic, you name it. That's what they're about. And so I would really prefer that our American dollars, in whatever form, don't go to fund assets that are owned by the Chinese Communist Party and targeted against the United States.
Of course, and this is obvious. Also, equally obvious to me was the fact that we were buying drones from China for so many years. And I know that we have now decided we're not going to buy from DJI, but Congressman, what about all of those drones right now in our arsenal that China made? Can't they see everything that's in that drone that we can see since they made the drone?
Well, there is the potential for that, and that is why I've been, for years, been very strong advocate for, decoupling from these Chinese-made products. For example, in the freight rail industry, I've worked really, really hard to address that issue in the freight rail industry, but the drone manufacturing has moved so fast. Heck, I've got companies in my district that were engaged in this 10 years ago, but they were outpaced by the Chinese. They wanted to be able to offer these products to American farmers, but they couldn't keep pace because the technology changed so quick, and they were outfunded, and they had to go a different direction with it. So now we're reliant on these Chinese drones. We can't continue with that type of footing.
Exactly. And John Ratcliffe, when he was DNI, and also Congressman from Texas, told me very clearly the Chinese modus operandi is rob, replicate, replace. So, I mean, that's probably what happened to the companies in your district. They were robbed of their intellectual property. They were replaced. And that's what the CCP does. But real quick, do you believe this operation in Iran is as much about China? And do you think that this could jeopardize the president's meeting with Xi Jinping at the end of March?
Well, it's a very tenuous relationship. I know that they try to characterize this as an affable relationship, and I get it, because that personally they may have an exchange that may be favorable. But broadly speaking, the Chinese Communist Party is not our friend. This attack on Iran was not an attack on China, but it most certainly is an impact on China. When you look at, for example, the Strait of Hormuz, that was not shut down militarily. That's shut down actuarially. The insurance companies are saying we will not insure those ships going through the strait. That's an impact on the Chinese, and the Chinese can't call up Lloyd's of London and say, hey, rewrite your insurance. That's just not going to happen. And so that puts them a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of the fact that 80% of their oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. That is so brilliant. President Trump is a brilliant strategist when it comes to all of this. Real quick before you go, because of course we are on the doorstep of the first primaries of the 2026 midterm elections. Voters in Arkansas, your state, are going to go to the polls today. Obviously, the big one is Texas and the Senate race there. And a lot of people say if the Republicans lose Texas, you've lost for the midterms. What do you want to say to voters in Arkansas today? And what should we know about this primary?
Well, in Arkansas, we are locked down. Conservative state. The primary that everybody is looking at really is the Senate race in Texas. And so all I'll say is this, as an Arkansan, God bless Texas. They're important to us, and we're going to continue to see them be leadership for GOP, and that will continue.
Mr. Chairman, we appreciate your leadership. We'll be watching your work, sir. Thank you.
You bet.